Good afternoon and welcome to Football Fridays at the EC. On behalf of the Notre Dame Alumni Association, I want to welcome you out here to this beautiful day. Thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. My name is Mandy Kanukin, and I am the Alumni Education Program Director at the Notre Dame Alumni Association. And it is my pleasure to give you a special treat this afternoon. If you've come out week after week, you know what's about to happen. If not, and you're new here, we are about to show a sneak peek of a What Would You Fight For video. Now, these videos are shown at halftime at every home football game, and they really highlight some of the amazing work that happens here at the university with our faculty, our students, and our alumni as a global force for good. And it's a real treat. I hope you enjoy this video. And after you watch this video, we're actually going to have a live conversation with the star of the video, Professor Tim Weninger, here on this stage. So I'm going to ask him some questions, and then we're also going to open up the Q&A to the audience. So please make sure you think of some great questions. It's a very topical theme that we're going to be having a conversation about. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So enjoy the video and stay tuned for the interview afterwards. Thank you.
Falsehood flies, and the truth comes limping after. Jonathan Swift wrote those words in 1710. They are as relevant now as ever. In 2012, I started studying how ISIS was using social media to recruit terrorists.
Many are recruited through a powerful online campaign.
It's fast and digital.
Using social media to recruit and inspire.
I wrote a letter to the Air Force warning them how other foreign actors could manipulate social media to spread misinformation and influence our electoral process. I was hoping I would be wrong.
Illegally using social media and disrupt the 2016...
Defendants allegedly conducted what they called information warfare.
Frankly, the United States is under attack.
In collaboration with DARPA, the research division of the United States Department of Defense, Notre Dame professor Tim Weninger is working to combat the spread of misinformation and state-sponsored propaganda.
The work we're doing at Notre Dame focuses on finding the vulnerabilities within the algorithms of social media platforms, and then developing technologies to safeguard them against manipulation.
Tim is on the very cutting edge of research in online social behavior. He is a great example of someone who thinks not just about the technology, not just about the science, but what does it actually mean? How is it going to change how we live and act every day?
The scary thing about the age of social media is the speed and the scale at which misinformation spreads. We've seen it incite mob violence in India and sway elections from the UK to America. This is a technology problem. Engineers help create it, but we can also help solve it. And we must, because the future of our democracy and our society depend upon it.
The University of Notre Dame asks, what would you fight for?
Fighting the spread of misinformation. We are the Fighting Irish.
Please welcome to the stage Professor Tim Weninger. All right, thank you, Tim. And before we get started, I'm going to make sure we do a proper introduction of Professor Weninger. Now, Tim is an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering and is also part of Notre Dame's Interdisciplinary Center for Network Science and Applications. Did I get it right?
That's right.
All right,
That's right.
Good. Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm sure you all enjoyed that video. It's fascinating work. And it's incredibly important and timely at this moment in our society. So we did just watch this short snippet, and if you missed it, it was about Tim's research and how you began working and studying ISIS and on social media, and that led to a prediction that Russia could interfere with the 2016 election. So how in the world did you start doing this work?
Right, so I wanted to say, first of all, thank you all for having me. It's good to see you all here on a great Friday for football. This whole story started when this is about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was a PhD student at the University of Illinois, and like a lot of the students and grad students at the time, Facebook was new, And there's Twitter and Reddit and all the other social media sites, and I was surfing the web just like any other person, just like we all do. And I remember reading a news article that ISIS they had a group of maybe 200 or 300 people who were sitting in a building somewhere in Syria, and their job, they woke up in the morning and they went to bed in the evening, and all they did all day long was upvote and like and reshare and create propaganda for ISIS. And so I thought, well, what would happen if, let's say, some state-sponsored or some terrorist organization like ISIS or whoever were to have a coordinated effort to inject votes and likes and reshares in any kind of political or emergency situation in any part of the world. And so I got to start thinking, and then so we started doing some experiments. I was wondering how easy is it to spread this kind of misinformation? So I like most scientists, I devised an experiment, and this experiment was, let's inject votes on some social media platforms, just a handful at a time, on innocuous things like sports events or the next thing on TV, and see, does that vote, those 1 or 2 or 3 votes, have an effect in the eventual outcome? And what we found was really interesting. We found that 1 vote will take a post, on average, and it'll make it twice as likely to reach the front page. So if I injected a vote into just 1 single vote, made it almost twice as likely to reach the front page of either Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or YouTube or whatever.
So real quick, I want to make sure I clarify. When you say vote on Facebook, you're kind of referring to like a like.
Yeah, so a vote is a general term. So it's an upvote on Reddit, a like on Facebook, a retweet, or a like on Twitter. On YouTube, it's a thumbs up. So just one of those has a tremendous impact. And if you could get 200 people in a building all upvoting the same thing, and downvoting the other things, then that has a tremendous impact on what people see and read in the news. We are all editors now of the news that we consume. So every time you share or vote, you're acting as an editor. And that has tremendous impacts on the news that we see.
So that kind of answers a little bit of my next question. For all of us, non-misinformation experts, which I would certainly be one of them, I'm just somebody that checks Facebook. How in the world does false information spread on social media? Can you kind of describe that in my terms?
Right. So the misinformation spreading on Facebook is pretty straightforward. If you can have 200 or 300 people, or even fewer, 75 or 100 people, or just you and your friends, get together and coordinated retweet or like or share something, what ends up happening is that puts it to the front of more eyeballs get to see it. And then what ends up happening is as more people see it, more people have a chance to upvote it and share it themselves. You can't keep someone else from sharing it. All you can do is spread. You can't ever unspread. You can't stop it. All you can do is promote it. And so what ends up happening is that people, when they go through and they're searching Facebook or Twitter, they start from the top of their feed and they scroll. And most people will read a headline and not click on anything. They won't investigate. They won't read it. And they say, that headline I agree with, or it's interesting, and I'll share it, or I'll like it. So we ran an experiment to see, as scientists do, when someone shares something, or likes it, or retweets it, how often do they actually click on the article? And we found on Reddit, on Twitter, and on YouTube, 75% of all shares and votes were committed without the user ever clicking on the link. I presume they read the article, the headline, but they read the headline and they share it. And they don't actually investigate what's happening. And as I said before, since we are all now editors and curators of everyone else's newsfeed, that has a big problem.
And I'm sure I'm 100% positive that I'm guilty of that. Are you guilty of that?
I am guilty. I was a member of my own experiment, and 75% is the average, and I was 68%. So I am guilty. We are all guilty, and it's a major problem.
And so then how do you combat it? I mean, I think you kind of said we have to be editors, right? We have to read what we like before we like it. Is that the best way to combat this problem?
Yeah, so there's a tricky political and free speech implications that happen here. What we could do is we could have some government agencies saying that this news we can't print. And that's something that's unacceptable to me and I think to most of us. We could say social media platforms, you are responsible for the content that you host, and that's a tricky legal situation. But I think the thing that we can all do independently is read and investigate the news and information that we share and spread. That's the thing that we need to do, to be critical thinkers, to investigate and to actually read what you share, because to remember that you're an editor of someone else's news feed. Now, news organizations are trying to do this. Facebook is trying to fight misinformation on their own, but they're having a hard time. Facebook, for example, ran an experiment that was coloring some of the news articles as disputed. Like if it's a fake news article, it would be disputed. And they would actually draw a red box around that, and that actually made the problem worse. Because what ended up happening was that people who saw those red boxes say, okay, this must be fake, but then all of the other non-red boxes must be true, when that's not the case. It's just simply not yet vetted. And so it actually made the problem worse. The things that we're trying to do on Facebook and YouTube aren't helping. And so it comes to us. We all individually have to do our part.
And it comes to you because you're doing the work and the research into this, which is greatly appreciated, and it's incredibly important work. So speaking of which, because this is such incredibly important work, you just recently won a $1.5 million grant from the Department of State to continue this research. Have you worked with the government in the past, and how will you use this grant in the future?
Right, so that's a good question. Air Force was the first one to sponsor this. This was 6 years ago that we decided to study this. DARPA is funding it currently. The Department of State just asked us to do some more work. With the Department of State, it's a matter of the internet is only available to about 1/3 of the human population right now. And when the next 1/3 comes online in the next 5 or 10 years, when they see Twitter and Facebook and other social media platforms for the first time, we need to be able to inform them that how it works, the algorithmic biases and the algorithmic processes that generate the newsfeed that you see, to inform them that they are also editors of the newsfeed themselves.
So how will students be kind of integrated into this work, or how have they been integrated into this work?
So the students here at Notre Dame have been working. I have Maria Glinsky has been working on this. We have Rachel Crone working on this, are two of my fantastic students. They're running experiments. They're trying to study how people perceive information on the internet and how they share it, and then human behavior in these digital formats. And they're critical to this work. And we're growing this at Notre Dame, and soon Notre Dame has been a leader in this for a long time, and we're going to continue to fight the spread of misinformation.
Fantastic, thank you. I am going to open it up to the crowd, but before we take our first question, I have to ask the quintessential question for every professor that's working here at Notre Dame. Why did you choose Notre Dame to do this work?
This is a great question. Why? So I would love to say I came in February to visit, and it was
not good timing.
It was cold, and so Notre Dame is one of the best universities in the world. They have a distinct mission to fight for good in our society. I also have to have a shout out to my father-in-law, though. He is a huge Notre Dame fan. I'm going to embarrass him. He actually has a blue post and gold mailbox in front of his door. Yeah, it's a diehard fan. When I came to interview here at Notre Dame, I got a package in the mail. It was a Notre Dame tie. And I'm still known around the department as the guy who wore a Notre Dame tie to his Notre Dame interview. So there's a little family pressure, and it's also one of the best universities in the world.
Terrific. Good. Well, I do want to make sure that we open up this really important topic to the audience. So if you have a question, we have a couple of microphone runners. So right here in the back and then over here, please, if you have a question, raise your hand. It's time to grill the professor with all of your difficult questions. We open it up to the audience, and we've got one right here in the middle.
My question is, are some sources, the people clicking on these headlines, where are these headlines from? Now, would this be like a headline from the Washington Post, the New York Times, or would it be a headline that you have a hard time figuring out who posted it?
So the headlines, that's a great question. There is no, to my knowledge, there is no filtering that happens. And one of the great things about social media is that the New York Times and the Washington Post are no longer the arbiters of truth, right? They're one among the many. And so if BuzzFeed, for example, which is some new media outlet, if they come up with a great headline and a great story, then they can be as reputable as the Washington Post and the New York Times. So there is no filtering by that post. Now, what ends up happening is if BuzzFeed or Medium or any kind of self-blogging post gets picked up by some bad actors and promoted by those 200 clicks, that 200 clicks gets the post to the top ranking, then we do the rest of the work because we don't investigate that news. We don't read it. We like the title, and then we share it.
So it really could be a headline from anywhere. And again, the problem is still the same, that you need to read it, and that before you like it, before you share it, you need to be, again, the distributor of your own.
Right. We are the editors of our friends' news feeds.
Yeah.
And so we have that responsibility.
Any other questions from the audience? We've got another one right back here.
Frankly, I'm not really surprised that bad actors try to interfere in our political process. I mean, I would expect that they would. Do we participate in other people's elections? In fact, do we weaponize our social media to try to influence politics in other countries?
So I've been working with so the question is, does America do this back to other countries and organizations? Yeah, sure. There's radio stations that were built during the Cold War that we couldn't actually go into Russia, but we could have radio stations in Eastern Europe broadcasting into Russia. We do this right now in North Korea. We have a radio station in South Korea that broadcasts into North Korea. Sure. So yeah, that's something that I'm not involved with. I dare not be involved in that. That's up to the military and the Department of State. My job is to understand how humans interact with this new digital media. So I'm not part of any kind of offensive propaganda on behalf of the United States or any other organization.
I've got one more question also. I'm just curious, undergraduates, I think you recently had a new, like a media literacy course for undergraduate students at Notre Dame. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right, so that's a good question. There's a new school of global affairs, the Keough School of Global Affairs here at Notre Dame. It's a few years old now, and one of the things that we decided to do was teach a course. It was a couple weeks long in media literacy and digital media for those graduate students, and there were also undergrads as well. What we do is we basically talk through all the problems and promises of social media and digital influence.
Fantastic. Super interesting work. I'm sure the students really, especially right now, it's got to be a hugely popular course to take.
Yeah, it actually happened over spring break, and despite happening, so spring break at Notre Dame, it is still exceptionally cold here, and we had...
Is that real news? Are you sure about that?
That's real news. That is not misinformation.
Just kidding.
And we still had about 40 people stay behind to take that course, and so I think it's going to grow into a full course probably next fall.
Very cool. Very cool. Are there any other questions? I want to make sure we get to everything. We got one more?
Mine as well. Curious, so you talk about social media. Are you working with the search engines like Google as well?
Yeah. I will be up to Google in New York in 2 weeks. So Google is sponsoring, so is Google, Facebook, Microsoft, a handful of others are sponsoring a Credibility on the Web workshop, and I'm one of the featured speakers at that workshop, and it'll be in 2 weeks.
And so with Google, I think we've talked about this a little bit before. Can you describe a little bit about the work without going to?
That's another topic. I will say that if you want to know about what Google is doing, come to the Shamrock Series game in New York City.
Good plug.
Google's Truth and Search team is in New York City, and I will host them during the Friday of the Shamrock Series game. So come see us in New York if you want to learn more about that.
Tim is in very high demand, obviously really great work and very important work. So I really, really appreciate you coming out here, sharing the video. Now you've seen it. Now tomorrow during halftime, whether you're watching the game from home or in the stadium, you know a little bit more about the background behind this incredibly important work, and just really cool. So thank you for coming out. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to everybody. Thanks for your time and attention. I want to mention we do have a Christmas ornament from the Alumni Association Association that I'm going to give to you after this. So a little gift. And also I'm going to make sure that if you are not planning to, make sure you head to the auditorium at 1:30 for a Chalk Talk with Bill and Bill. It's not going to be quite the same topic. It's actually going to be focused on football. So not as much about misinformation. Hopefully everything in there that they're talking about is true, but that's for you to discern and figure out. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Professor Weninger. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.